23 feet. In certain stretches, that is the entire width of U.S. Route 550 as it climbs over Red Mountain Pass in southwestern Colorado, 2 lanes of asphalt pressed flat against a cliff wall on one side, and on the other, nothing. No guardrail, no shoulder, just several hundred feet of open air above the Uncompahgre River, and a name that sounds like a boast, the $1 Million Highway. Somewhere near the 88th milepost, on a bend the local climbers call the waterfall, the pavement curves so tightly that your headlights sweep across empty sky before they ever find the road again. People have been driving this stretch since 1883. Not everyone who starts the 25 miles between Ouray and Silverton finishes it the way they planned. I want you to picture the drive first, before we get into why it earns its reputation. You are heading south out of Ouray, climbing fast, the Uncompahgre Gorge dropping away to your right. The rock wall on your left is close enough to touch. There is no room here for a mistake, and there is no room for a second car to make one either. If you find this as unsettling as I do, you might want to subscribe before we go further. Because we cover roads like this one every week, the ones that kill quietly, without much national attention, one crash and one closure at a time. And if you have ever driven Route 550 yourself, or you are watching this from somewhere near Ouray or Silverton right now, I would genuinely like to know what that first hairpin felt like. For everyone else, here is how a wagon trail for mules became one of the most dangerous paved roads in the United States. The man responsible for this road was Otto Mears, a Russian-born entrepreneur who had already built a reputation and a fortune constructing toll roads and narrow-gauge railroads through Colorado's most unforgiving terrain. In 1883, Mears carved a route through the San Juan Mountains to connect Ouray with the mining camps around Ironton and eventually Silverton. At a construction cost historians place somewhere between $125,000 and $200,000, nowhere near a literal million. The nickname has at least 3 competing origin stories: that the gravel used to surface the road was laced with low-grade silver and gold tailings worth a fortune, that the views alone were worth $1 million, or the version favored by several Colorado historians, that 3 separate road contractors bid on a later reconstruction of the route and their combined bids landed, almost too perfectly, on exactly $1 million. Whichever story is true, the name stuck, and it has outlived every person who could confirm which one was accurate. The San Juan Mountains that the highway climbs through are themselves part of why the road behaves the way it does. This is young, steep, volcanic terrain, carved further by glaciers into narrow gorges and near vertical slopes, the kind of landscape that rewards a mule trail and punishes a modern automobile. Mears was not building through gentle foothills. He was cutting a ledge across the face of mountains that regularly shed rock, snow, and ice onto anything below them, and the mining camps he was connecting existed only because the same mountains were rich in silver and gold. Ghost towns and mining ruins still line the route today, remnants of a boomtown economy that drew thousands of prospectors into some of the least hospitable terrain in the continental United States, chasing ore that, in the end, was worth considerably less than the human cost of getting it out. What Mears built was not designed for automobiles. It was a shelf, blasted and hand-carved into the mountainside, wide enough for a mule team and a wagon, running close to the Uncompahgre River far below. Above Bear Creek Falls, modern Route 550 still follows that same original shelf today, more than a century later, because there was never anywhere else on the mountainside to put a road. When the regional mining boom faded and the Silverton Railroad shut down in 1921, the toll road was handed over to Colorado's Highway Department. In 1924, state crews upgraded the route for motor vehicles, but they largely kept Mears's original alignment, including a 200-foot tunnel, 17 feet wide, that he had blasted through solid rock near Ouray, a tunnel still in use today. Its original dimensions unchanged. The road would not stay open through the winter for another decade after that upgrade. It took until 1935 and the arrival of dedicated snow-clearing equipment before Route 550 became passable year-round. Before that, Ouray and Silverton were effectively cut off from each other for months at a stretch, separated by 11,000 feet of elevation and whatever the mountain decided to drop on the road between them. It is worth saying, too, that Route 550 is a much longer road than the 25 miles most people mean when they say million-dollar highway. The full highway runs roughly 300 miles from a junction near Bernalillo, New Mexico, just north of Albuquerque, all the way up to Ouray. For most of its length in New Mexico, it is an entirely different kind of road, a wide 4-lane divided highway with a 70-mile-per-hour speed limit built through open, flat country. That stretch has its own history of danger, driven mostly by speed and narrow medians rather than mountain geometry, but it is not the road this video is about. Once Route 550 crosses into Colorado and begins climbing toward the San Juan Mountains, it narrows down to 2 lanes and stays that way for the rest of the journey, and everything changes. The wide, forgiving highway of the New Mexico plains becomes, within a few dozen miles, a shelf road blasted into a cliff, and that transformation is the entire subject of what follows. That elevation is the first thing worth understanding, because it explains almost everything that follows. Red Mountain Pass summits at 11,018 feet. Just to the south, Molas Pass tops out at 10,899 feet, and Coal Bank Pass at 10,660 feet. The highway strings these 3 summits together across roughly 50 miles between Durango and Ouray. But it is the 25-mile section between Ouray and Silverton, climbing over Red Mountain Pass itself, that earns the million-dollar name and the road's darker reputation. This is high alpine terrain, above tree line for long stretches, where the pavement was cut into slopes so steep that modern engineers, given a blank sheet of paper today, would almost certainly route the road somewhere else entirely. But the road already exists, and it cannot simply be abandoned. Silverton, a small former mining town whose year-round population is measured in the hundreds, depends on this highway for mail, groceries, fuel, and emergency access. There is only one other paved route in or out, a longer detour over Lizard Head Pass that adds roughly an hour to any trip. When Route 550 closes, Silverton is functionally an island, and its economy, built almost entirely around tourism, closes with it. The road itself explains the summer danger. Hairpin turns without guardrails. A posted speed limit of 25 miles per hour in the tightest sections, and shoulders that in places narrow to nothing at all. A driver who drifts wide on a blind curve or brakes too late for a switchback has nowhere to correct. There is only the cliff face on one side and the drop on the other. Colorado's own transportation department has logged the consequences with clinical precision. Between January 2020 and December 2024, 53 crashes were recorded along the 15-mile stretch of highway south of Ouray, and 33 of them involved a vehicle leaving the roadway entirely sliding, drifting, or simply driving off the edge. 11 people were injured in that 5-year span. It is the sheer physical geometry of the road, more than any single hazard, that turns an ordinary lapse in attention into a fall of hundreds of feet. Even the rock itself is a hazard here. In January of that same period, a freeze and thaw cycle loosened a section of mountainside on the north side of Red Mountain Pass, and boulders began raining onto the highway for days. The Colorado Department of Transportation closed the road for more than 2 weeks to stabilize the slope, and the closure alone cut Silverton's tourism traffic roughly in half for the duration. But summer traffic accidents are only part of what makes Red Mountain Pass infamous. The rest arrives with the first heavy snow. This corridor is widely regarded as the most avalanche-prone stretch of highway in the lower 48 states, and on a per-mile basis, among the most avalanche-hazardous roads on the entire North American continent. Across the roughly 20-mile section of Route 550 that includes Red Mountain Pass, highway engineers have documented somewhere between 70 and 160 distinct avalanche paths crossing or threatening the road, depending on how narrowly a single path is counted. Colorado as a whole has recorded more than 200 avalanche fatalities over the past 50 years. More than any other state in the country, and the mountains around Ouray have been especially lethal for well over a century. In 1905 alone, avalanches killed more than 100 people in the Ouray area, back when mining crews lived and worked directly beneath the slide paths that now cross the highway. The road that eventually replaced their trails inherited the same terrain, and the same exposure to the mountain above it. One slide path in particular has claimed more lives on this highway than any other. It is called the East Riverside Slide, a nearly mile-long avalanche path that releases off the flank of Abrams Mountain and crosses the highway just south of Ouray, in the same general stretch where the road narrows and the drop steepens. On March 3, 1963, a pastor named Marvin Hudson was driving along this section of Red Mountain Pass with his 2 daughters, 17-year-old Amelia and 11-year-old Pauline, traveling to fulfill his pastoral duties in Silverton. The East Riverside Slide released while their car was on the highway. All 3 were swept into the ravine and killed. A memorial marker still stands near the site today, naming them and the date, along with a second marker nearby honoring the highway workers who would follow them. The same slide path went on to kill 3 more people, all of them Colorado Department of Transportation snowplow drivers doing the job of keeping the highway open through the winter. Robert Miller died there in 1970. Terry Kishbaugh, 28 years old, a husband and father of 3, was killed there in 1978. In the same winter, his colleague Lloyd Berry decided that 5 seasons on Red Mountain Pass were all he was willing to risk, and retired rather than face a 6th. And in the early hours of March 5, 1992, a rotary snowplow was clearing that stretch of highway, leading a small caravan of passenger vehicles behind it, when a tire chain came loose on the front left wheel. 2 DOT employees stepped out of the cab to fix it. The East Riverside Slide let go while they were standing in the open. One of them, 36-year-old Daniel Jaramillo, was buried under roughly 2 feet of packed, avalanche-hardened snow and spent nearly 18 hours digging himself out, using a flashlight as a makeshift shovel until he finally broke through to open air. His colleague and crew foreman, Eddie Immel, did not survive. A sheriff's spokesman at the time estimated the odds that either man could have lived through that slide at roughly 1%. Now hold that for a second, because it is the hinge point of this entire story, and I want to come back to it after a quick pause. If a road like this one interests you, if you like the kind of history that most people drive straight past without ever knowing it exists, this is the right channel to stick around for, so go ahead and subscribe now before we finish the story. Because what happened after Eddie Immel's death changed Route 550 permanently. Immel's death was the 3rd snowplow driver lost to the same 100 feet of highway, and for Colorado's transportation officials, it became the breaking point. In the winter that followed, 1992 to 1993, the state partnered with the Colorado Avalanche Information Center to build a dedicated forecasting program specifically for this corridor. reading snowpack, weather, and slope data every day to predict when and where the mountain would release next, rather than simply reacting after it already had. In that first season alone, 152 avalanches crossed Route 550. 87 of them released naturally. The other 65 were triggered deliberately by crews firing retired military artillery into unstable slopes before the snow could threaten traffic, or plow crews below a practice that continues today, with a decommissioned howitzer still stationed near the pass for exactly that purpose. By the end of that first winter, the forecasters' predictions had proven accurate more than 91% of the time. It is, by most measures, one of the most successful avalanche safety programs on any highway in North America. It is also a quiet admission of exactly how dangerous this corridor remained, even after everything engineers had already tried on the road itself. The forecasting program has only grown more sophisticated since. The Colorado Avalanche Information Center and the state's Transportation Department now maintain a network of remote weather stations along Red Mountain Pass, feeding real-time snowfall, wind, and temperature data to forecasters who decide, storm by storm, when a controlled release is safer than waiting for the mountain to choose its own moment. The two agencies have described their early partnership as a merger of two very different institutional cultures, one built around keeping pavement clear and one built around reading snowpack. And finding a shared rhythm between them took years. What they built together is now treated as a model for other avalanche-prone highways across the American West, studied by transportation departments in states that are only beginning to face the kind of winters Colorado has managed on this corridor for more than 3 decades. The program has not eliminated the danger. It has only managed it storm by storm. In March of 2019, Red Mountain Pass was closed for 3 straight months after at least 21 separate avalanches buried the road, some of them piling snow 60 feet deep over the highway's concrete snowshed structures built specifically to let avalanches pass over the road rather than onto it. So crews and travelers sheltering beneath them stay protected. Crews spent months digging the pass back out before it reopened that June. Closures of a few hours or a full day remain routine every winter. DOT regularly shuts sections of the highway for what it calls safety-critical maintenance, timing avalanche mitigation work around incoming storms and warning drivers days in advance through its own alert system. And while no driver has been killed by an avalanche on this stretch since Eddie Imel in 1992, the road has kept finding new ways to take lives, snow or no snow. The highway's own maintenance record tells the same story in a quieter register. Even in an ordinary, non-catastrophic winter, Route 550 over Red Mountain Pass closes repeatedly, sometimes for a planned mitigation operation lasting an hour or two, sometimes because a natural slide has already crossed the road before crews could get ahead of it. In one representative stretch of a single recent winter, the highway closed for scheduled maintenance in December, was shut again in February when forecasters expected up to 2 inches of snow an hour, closed once more in March after a slide swept over 2 vehicles near the summit, thankfully without injury, and closed yet again in April, simply to let crews finish the season's mitigation work. None of these closures made national news. They are simply the accepted rhythm of keeping this highway open, a negotiation with the mountain that DOT repeats in some form almost every week from November through April. Not every close call here has ended in tragedy, and the near misses are almost as unsettling as the fatalities, because they show exactly how little separates one outcome from the other. In 2005, a minivan carrying 6 people went off the road on Red Mountain Pass and tumbled down a slope so steep that rescuers described it afterward as nearly 60 degrees. Everyone in the vehicle survived, a result so improbable that the family was later featured on national television talking about the importance of seatbelts. In 2011, a Bayfield man named Eric Petronek drove off the same pass and fell roughly 330 feet, escaping his burning car with second-degree burns and little else. Stories like these get repeated locally, almost like folklore, because they are the exception the road rarely grants. On the morning of August 5, 2025, a silver Honda Civic carrying 3 people was traveling south near milepost 88, close to the same general stretch as the East Riverside Slide, on the bend climbers call the Waterfall. Just after 8 in the morning, the car went off the shoulder and rolled roughly 320 feet down the mountainside before coming to rest upside down in Red Mountain Creek, the river running along the valley floor below the highway. 2 adults in the front seat, 42-year-old Louis Michael and 79-year-old Leoba Valdez, both from New Mexico, were pronounced dead at the scene. A juvenile girl, a passenger in the back, survived the fall trapped inside the wreckage. Rescuers from the Ouray Mountain Rescue Team spent hours engineering a technical rope system across the canyon, a highline, strung by climbers who scaled up to a ledge on one side of the gorge and rappelled down to secure an anchor on the opposite cliff face, just to reach her. It was the first time in the rescue team's 51-year history that a highline rescue of this kind had been necessary. She was pulled out and taken to a hospital just before 11:30 that morning. Colorado State Patrol opened an investigation into the cause of the crash. 9 weeks later, on October 9, 2025, a pickup truck went off the road within a mile or two of that same stretch and fell roughly 300 feet into the Uncompahgre River Gorge. This time, the driver survived with only minor injuries, hauled back up to the highway by the same volunteer rescue team using the same rope-based techniques they had used for the girl in August. News coverage of that October crash noted that 3 people had already died in that same short stretch of highway earlier in the year, a toll that did not include the truck's driver, who walked away. Local emergency responders, mostly volunteers, are the ones who absorb the cost of all of this. Year after year, incident after incident. The Ouray Mountain Rescue Team is not a large, salaried agency. It is a nonprofit built from local climbers, guides, and residents who train for exactly the kind of technical rope work that pulled a surviving juvenile out of a canyon in August of 2025 and a truck driver out of another canyon 2 months later. Over 5 decades of operation, they have been called to this same short stretch of highway more times than any of them would prefer to count. And the Highline Rescue in August was, by their own account, the first time in the organization's history that particular technique had ever been required. That single fact says something about how rarely a crash on this road allows for anything close to an easy rescue. What ties all of these stories together, the 1963 avalanche, the 1992 rescue, and the 2025 crashes alike, is not carelessness in any single damning sense. It is terrain that offers almost no margin for the ordinary mistakes every driver makes somewhere across a lifetime behind the wheel. A moment of distraction, a slightly late break into a switchback, a tire chain that slips loose at exactly the wrong second, on exactly the wrong 100 feet of road. On most highways, those moments cost a fender or a bruised ego. On Red Mountain Pass, with 23 feet of pavement and no guardrail between a car and a several 100-foot drop, the same small mistake can be the last one a person makes. The Colorado Department of Transportation has not widened the narrowest sections or added guardrails to most of the exposed curves, in part because doing so would compromise the very shelf road engineering that has kept the highway physically stable against the mountain for more than a century, and in part because Route 550 remains, deliberately, one of the most scenic drives in the country. A road people choose specifically because of the exposure it offers, not in spite of it. South of Silverton, the highway loosely parallels the route of the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad, the coal-fired train that has carried passengers and freight through this same valley since the mining era, and which today survives almost entirely as a tourist attraction in its own right. It is a useful reminder that this landscape has always demanded a choice between two imperfect options: a train confined to fixed rails through a narrow canyon, or a road with no rails at all, carved directly into the mountainside, where the only thing keeping a vehicle on the pavement is the driver behind the wheel. Both routes exist today because neither one ever fully solved the problem the terrain presented. They simply offered two different ways of living with it. Today, the $1 Million Highway is busier than it has ever been. It appears regularly on published lists of the most dangerous roads in America, and it has been named internationally, in the same breath as roads like Bolivia's Death Road and stretches of wartime highway in Iraq, for the sheer unforgiving nature of its geometry. Every summer, a steady stream of tourists drives it for the views, mostly without incident, while Colorado's avalanche forecasters and snowplow crews spend every winter reading the same slopes that killed Marvin Hudson's daughters and Eddie Imel, trying to stay one storm ahead of a mountain that has never fully cooperated. The highway still closes for hours or days at a time almost every winter, sometimes for planned mitigation work, sometimes because a slide has already crossed the road before anyone could stop it. The speed limit signs still read 25 miles per hour. The curves have not gotten any wider. The drop has not gotten any shorter. For Silverton, none of this is abstract. The town's entire modern identity, its restaurants, its lodges, its small mountain economy, depends on people being willing to drive this road toward them and, eventually, back out again. Cut the highway for 2 weeks because of a rock slide, as happened in the winter of 2024, and the town's tourism revenue can fall by roughly half for the duration. Cut it for 3 months, as happened after the avalanche season of 2019, and the effects ripple through the entire community, from grocery deliveries to emergency medical access. The road that endangers the people who drive it is the same road that keeps the town on the other end of it alive. That contradiction has never been resolved, because there is no version of this highway that removes the risk without also removing the thing that makes Silverton reachable at all. 23 feet. That is still the width of the road in its narrowest places, the same width it has been since Otto Mears first blasted this shelf into the mountainside in 1883. Somewhere near milepost 88, the bend called the Waterfall is still there, and the memorial marker for the Hudson family still stands where the East Riverside Slide comes down the mountain. If you ever find yourself on Red Mountain Pass in July or in January, remember that the road was never built with much room for error, and even now, a century and a half later, it still has none to spare. If you have driven it yourself, tell me in the comments what that stretch felt like from behind the wheel. Some roads you drive for the view. This one, you drive carefully, and you drive all the way through.